Hey everyone, this is Mike from the Comic Book Trove, here today with another Omnibus review. Today I'm going to be taking a look at the most recent printing of the Silver Surfer Omnibus Volume 1. Now this is a really cool book. It contains the full original Silver Age Silver Surfer solo series. I'm just going for that maximum level of alliteration with that one. And it's a pretty experimental series for its time. There's some cool ideas in here. The format of the series was pretty interesting. I'll talk about that more as we take a look through it. But if we start off by looking at the dust jacket, what we've got here is the standard variant cover on this one. It's the original issue cover to issue 1 of the Silver Surfer. This was the first time that we saw the origin story of the Surfer explored in any detail, so it's a pretty cool issue for that alone. I just think it's great artwork though by John Buscema. It's a really cool cover. And I preferred it to the DM variant, which was, well, it is a modern reimagining / homage cover to this by, I think it's Isad Ribic. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing that. Looking at the rest of the dust jacket then, with the spine, we can see that with this latest printing, this book has now officially joined the small spine text size crew that Marvel are now releasing these days with these Omnis. At the bottom, if we zoom way in, you can see those creator names in the smallest font possible. Liam Buscema, and then a little Silver Surfer image. And Volume 1. And technically this is a Volume 1, although when this book was originally printed, I think over 10 years ago now, you know, there's never been a mention or confirmation of a Volume 2 ever since, so to this day, not really sure if that will ever happen. We'll see. But what's in this volume is certainly really cool anyway, and speaking of which, you got your cover gallery on the back of the issues of the covers involved. And as I mentioned, it's the full Silver Age Silver Surfer series, so it's issues 1 to 18, a Fantastic Four annual excerpt from number 5, and Not Brandick, kind of bonus thing in the back as well. Underneath the dust jacket, on the hardcover itself, pretty standard plain design for the Silver Age Omnis. So we've got the Silver Surfer logo there. Very similar design on the spine, but with a different image at the bottom. And on the back, you get this cool image of the surfer soaring through the spaceways. So, if we take a look inside the book, just see what this series is all about. So, starting off with the creators on here. So Stan Lee writes everything in here, issues 1 to 18. John Buscema is the main penciler. He does the first 17 issues, with Jack Kirby just coming on for that final 18th issue. Number of different inkers on here though, so likes of Joe Sinnott, Sal Buscema, John's brother of course, and a few others. So plenty of different inkers at work here. Contents page, just giving you the original publication dates. I always like to see that. I think it's a cool feature. Just really gives you an idea of the period of history that you've got collected in a book when you see it listed in a clear way like that. And then you've got an introduction by Stan Lee as well. He basically talked about how much he was enjoying writing the character and how much fun he's always found him to be because of his, I suppose, status as that kind of outsider figure on Earth. You know, he's banished to Earth, but he's very much, you know, an alien from another world, a more civilized and sophisticated world, really. So he, as a character, he has a lot of thoughts to share on humanity's nature, I guess, the way that mankind behaves and the way we all treat each other, often without much respect and civility. Really, Stan really leaped on that as an opportunity to offer a lot of social commentary and share some of his own thoughts and opinions. We'll certainly see some examples of that, I'm sure, as we flick through, but we start things off with the origin story, as I mentioned. So what we learn in here is, firstly, we learn his real name. So the surfer is Norrin Radd. Comes from the planet Zenlar, which is one of these kinds of futuristic, seeming utopia type of places. Super scientifically advanced. They've kind of evolved beyond the need for war and aggression towards each other. Everything's settled in a much more sophisticated way. They've got high-tech gadgetry and technology. And everything was generally great there, in general, until one day Galactus came knocking at the door, and he basically turned up to do what he does. He was going to eat Zenlar, consume the planet, and Norrin stepped in, pleaded with Galactus. Here we see him here, turning up. basically pleaded with him to spare the planet, and in return he swore his allegiance to him, swore to become his servant, his herald. And so Galactus imbued him with the power cosmic, turned him into the Silver Surfer so he could soar through space and scout out suitable planets for him to consume. And in doing so, he has to leave his world behind and leave behind the woman he loves, this lady here, Shalabal. And throughout this series as well, and really throughout a lot of his publication history, there's always been an element of his stories where he's just lamenting the loss of his love, and in some cases desperately trying to find a way to reunite with her again. So yeah, pretty interesting setup to the character, a nice exploration of his background there. I think it's pretty interesting as origin stories go, pretty cool stuff. Certainly very, very cosmic in nature. This is, as a character, Silver Surfer is heavily ingrained into that whole cosmic side of the Marvel Universe. And as a result, this is quite an interesting series to read when compared alongside other Silver Age Marvel comics, because really, the Silver Surfer is not a superhero, not in the same way that the likes of the Avengers and Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four are, and so on. He just happens to be stuck on Earth, and really it's the last place he wants to be. He's forced to be here because of his betrayal of Galactus in the original Fantastic Four issues 48 to 50, where he turned on Galactus and Galactus left, but basically used his power to make it so that the Surfer couldn't leave Earth again. So he's earthbound, he's trapped on this planet, and he's trying to find a place for himself. But he's very much this outsider figure, this misfit. Nobody really trusts him or understands him. Similarly, he doesn't understand why humanity's instinctive reaction is to so often, turn to violence, aggression, war, to try and resolve situations. So definitely a whole chunk of this is the Surfer kind of offering a lot of philosophical ideas and observations, talking about how things would be better if we all just got along, A lot of stuff that I'm sure many people would generally agree with. It's very on-the-nose stuff. Stan clearly enjoyed the opportunity to share some of this thing. It was kind of like Stan's soapbox, but the comic, in a way. But it works well enough, because it kind of works with this character's situation. You do feel his desperation, and if you put yourself in the position of the Surfer, somebody who has spent so long at this point soaring through space and seeing the kinds of things that as people we could just never even imagine, comprehend, we wouldn't be able to really understand what he's used to, but now he's trapped on this planet full of, humans really. And I tell you, if I was some kind of cosmically powered, space-soaring, almost demigod type thing, I wouldn't want to be trapped on this planet either. Mephisto is a pretty regular antagonist throughout here. He takes an interest in the Surfer, kind of makes it his mission to corrupt him. It's like almost like he challenges himself to do it. And Shalabal is used as a tool, really, just to manipulate him. I want to just point out, though, throughout here that it's just some really, really cool artwork by John Buscema. I think there's some fantastic artwork throughout here. Honestly, so many great pages where I could easily just stop and stare, but trying to keep going for the sake of keeping this review moving. Also, we do start to see letter pages being included from a few issues in. And I always say with these Silver Age books, really cool to get these reprinted in here like this. Gives you a great insight to what readers at the time were thinking about these different titles. This is a great cover. Love this, and this issue in general is really, really fun. Surfer taking on Thor because of Loki, naturally. All about his schemes and manipulations behind the reason why these two would fight. But also for these next few issues, I think issues 4 to 7, John Buscema is inked by his brother Sal, and this is just a great combination. Those two really work well together. Another thing as well, obviously you can see the artwork for yourself, so perhaps I don't need to talk about that as much, but another thing that you perhaps wouldn't necessarily notice but when you do notice it, it's quite apparent, is that what you see throughout here, if you take a look at the different panels, very few of them contain narration boxes like this, little text boxes of narration. Now, nowadays, that's, you know, you'd be surprised if you ever really saw one of those. But back in the 60s, especially in comics written by Stan Lee, they were usually everywhere. You know, like almost every panel would be filled with a box telling you what's happening in the panel. But in this series, for whatever reason, and I don't know why, because Stan doesn't talk about it in those introductions in here either, but he very rarely uses them. Certainly compared to the other stuff he was writing. They're just very rare that you see them. And I'm not saying that the dialogue is necessarily the most free-flowing in the world, but it's certainly nice to see a bit more space just left for the panels and the artwork to shine, you know, and to just speak for itself to a certain extent. And I always thought that was interesting. I remember noticing that the first time I read this series and thinking, huh, this is pretty interesting, pretty cool. Yeah, but as again, so we're still seeing, this is still John Buscema inked by Sal. I think Sal just had a really great understanding, I guess, of his brother's artwork and just inked it really well. I really like the way that the Surfer looks in these issues. He's desperately finding a way during these stories to try and find some way to break free of the force that's keeping him trapped on the planet. And I think he's recruited the help of this guy who's a scientist. It has been a while since I've read these stories, to be honest, but certainly I remember having a good time, and I will be checking this out again, reading through it. Quite looking forward to it, actually. Oh, that's a really cool opening splash page. It's like it's just sort of minimalist, really, in style, but it's really cool. And this image of the Surfer just sort of pleading, you know, despairing. It's quite on the nose, I suppose, but you know, there's nothing subtle about it. But just the absolute despair of this character in here, it makes you feel for him, really. As I mentioned, I touched upon already, you understand why he doesn't want to be on this world. And the more of these issues you read through with people just being, you know, antagonistic towards him when he's often just trying to help or just have a conversation. Yeah, it's great character work, I think. Interesting issue here featuring Frankenstein, where he's like ruling over some small Eastern European village. I think he tries capturing the Surfer and using him to take some power from him. But that's issue 7, I believe. Yeah, so from issue 8 onwards, the series reverts back to being standard length issues. So we go back to the kind of 20-page issues format from here on. I guess the series just wasn't doing well enough to justify continuing to print double-length issues. There must have been, obviously, an additional production cost to making those. I guess that this just wasn't doing well enough to justify the continuation of that. Bit of a shame, but the rest of the issues in here are still pretty fun. Mephisto again, as I say, he's probably, well, he is the most frequently recurring villain in here. And actually that's really the start of, there's been a really kind of long rivalry between those characters ever since, really. They've often been at odds with each other. I think this is an interesting story where this kind of sort of revolutionary guy, he sort of wants to try and take control of Zenlar, but you know, he's sort of a military dictator in the making kind of character, and he's sort of conning Shalabal into following him to Earth to try and again just use her as a way to manipulate the Surfer, as a way to make him an easy target. You know, that's a frequent element of Silver Age comics that is a bit unfortunate. I think that is one of the elements that shows these kinds of comics. It shows the age of them. It dates them more so than other elements. Is just the very passive portrayal of a lot of female characters. Now, I'm not saying every single female character needs to be some kind of strong superhero that saves the day single-handedly, but all too often, in a lot of different titles, we do see, I think, female characters being very underutilized, certainly as to how they could have been based on their potential. I'm not just talking about side characters like Shalabal in here, but even more prominent characters like Sue Storm / Richards, Scarlet Witch, the Wasp, Black Widow. A lot of these characters during this time just didn't really do a whole lot. But anyway, that's really a side point. A lot of these kinds of supernatural stuff, these kind of old world kind of cultists and black magic type things going on in here. With we've seen Frankenstein already. That's more scientific than supernatural, I suppose, but still that kind of old world, sort of like Eastern European small villages with things going on. I really like this disguise that the surfer wears. Just puts on a trench coat, hat and glasses, and nobody's supposed to notice his shining bright silver face. It's a fun series. I've talked about before about the Silver Age comics. I've got a fondness for them. I really enjoy them. They're not always the best thing to read. As I say, they do show their age in a number of ways. There's certain style that they're written, for example. But there's a lot of fun to be had with them, certainly, and it's great to have this kind of history preserved in these just beautiful looking omnibus editions. Cool issue here with Spider-Man guest starring. Usually a sign that a series was struggling for sales if they put Spider-Man in it. That's kind of the equivalent of using a defibrillator on a series. Try and get it going again by putting the most popular character in there. Try and attract some reader attention. And Human Torch featuring in the next story. I definitely need to reread this though. The main thing I remember from reading it is that I did enjoy it overall. But Mephisto again. I'm finding that there's certainly a lot of this stuff that I could do with rereading and refresh my memory on. Hopefully though, as I'm flicking through it, you're getting a good idea of what this looks like. I really, really adore this artwork by John Buscema all throughout. These first 17 issues. Really cool stuff. But then we get to the final issue in here, so issue 18. And this is pretty interesting because for whatever reason, the final issue is drawn by Jack Kirby. So Buscema left, didn't leave, but just wasn't chosen to draw this one, strangely enough. Stan mentions in one of his introductions in here that he doesn't remember why that was the case, but Kirby came on and did this last issue, and so certainly looks very distinctively different. Kirby's obviously great, did a lot of fantastic artwork, but I prefer the artwork for the first 17 issues. I think Buscema was doing just a really good job of it. So when you shift to Kirby, who's got a totally different style really, a very distinctive style, it's just quite jarring for this final issue. But more frustrating than that is this final splash page. Such an interesting and intriguing cliffhanger to end the issue on, where basically the surfer decides that after everything he's gone through in the series up to this point, being shunned and just abused by the human race, nobody has really extended a hand of friendship to him, really. Far more people have just been giving him a hard time, feeling like he has to constantly be on the run. And he basically says no more. So he's going to swear vengeance and turn on mankind. And certainly the suggestion here was that they might be taking the drastic decision to turn the surfer into a villain. But it wasn't to be, because we never see the aftermath of this decision. Not only was this the end of this series, so there was never issue 19, but that story thread was never picked up anywhere else. And according to Stan, again in his introduction in here, I don't know how true this is, but according to him, as he wrote it at the time in there, the reason they basically backed out of that and cancelled the series was because they just didn't have the courage to see that through. they thought it was too bold a move, and they didn't want to turn the Surfer into a villain or explore that path. So instead of undoing it or going ahead with it, they just did nothing, and the series ended. Now I feel like there might be more to it than that, because that seems like a strange explanation, but certainly that's what you get. That's what he says about it anyway. This is the final story. There's like a bonus story in here. Jack Kirby illustration again from Fantastic Four Annual 5. I think this is Quasimodo. Is that what this guy's called? Yeah, very much just a bonus story. Doesn't really have any direct relation to anything else. And then you got a not brand deck. And I mean, I just never have any patience for these. Just don't enjoy them. So I'm just skipping through that. I don't find them funny. Oh yes, there's a final afterword as well. I've not read this one yet, but another Stan Lee letter / essay in there. And we've got some reprint covers. I've got a page here that's apparently stuck together. Ooh, this is a tense moment. Okay, all good. Yeah, by the way, there's that DM variant cover. I just think the Surfer looks really strange in that image. He's got a weird looking head. I don't know. Anyway, I'm much happier with the original cover, this one. So hopefully that's been of some interest, giving you a decent idea of what the book's like. Certainly, as I say, it's a very interesting read. It's often quite heavy-handed with the philosophical musings that Stan Lee was putting out there. It wasn't anything that was particularly subtle. It wasn't that he was basically giving any kind of message that's never been heard before, but it's still, I think, poignant enough that it makes the Surfer a sympathetic character, because you do sympathise with him, or at least I found that I did through here. His situation was pretty extreme, I suppose, you know, being stranded on an alien world with a bunch of people who don't even get along with each other, never mind him. It's just an interesting series to read. I think the Surfer is a cool character. The biggest disappointment, of course, is that the series in here is effectively unfinished with a final issue that goes nowhere. But you know what? That doesn't matter too much. Certainly for the first 17 issues, I think you're getting a great classic comic experience. And for me, this is one of the highlights of Marvel's Silver Age output. So I definitely recommend it if you're interested in the character at all. But anyway, thanks as always for watching, for sticking with me through this video. Appreciate the support. And let me know if you've read this series before, what you think of it. Whether you agree that it's pretty interesting to read, or maybe you just disagree completely and didn't enjoy it. Let me know why, if that's the case. Happy to hear your thoughts. And yeah, let me know if you're picking up this book or have it already. Just like hearing from different people on this stuff. It's always fun for me. But yeah, thanks again, guys. I'll be back again soon to discuss something else.